Globalization and Work Conclusion. Dr. Marquita Walker, Department of Labor Studies, IUPUI. Reviewing globalization and work. Work, workers, and the conditions under which workers labor are strongly affected by globalization through neoliberal policies, cross-border migrations, transnational capital fluidity, and the international division of labor. The interconnectedness of the social, cultural, economic, and political world resulting from globalization brings both challenges and opportunities for workers worldwide. National efforts to enhance property rights and suppress workers' rights through legislation and court decisions results in millions of workers working for low wages and unsafe conditions. The original intent of international organizations such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization were to rebuild nations after World War II, lift people out of poverty, and level the playing field for trade between nations. And that has resulted in a skewed propensity for the global north as a consumer economy to reap benefits at the expense of the global south, a producer economy. Undercurrents of discontent from workers worldwide who believe the system is rigged against them are visible in labor conflicts such as strikes, protests, and demonstrations reflecting anger under the current system. Yet there does exist hope for some workers. Globalization and work, current challenges and future projects. The world's labor market continues to slowly expand as more workers are incorporated into the global labor force and most of them move to urban areas. Projections suggest that by 2050 the world's population will reach 9 billion people. 70% of them will live in cities, and most of those cities will be in Asia. This has huge implications for the formal and informal economies, infrastructure suitability, housing, transport, and food needs, and welfare. These growth issues are complicated by the Great Recession of 2007 and 8, a result of some subprime mortgage lending in the U.S., which catapulted a general worldwide economic recession from which many nations are still in recovery. European destabilization in the Eurozone was exacerbated by Germany's insistence on austerity measures from poorer countries in return for stabilization loans. The upshot of this is the projection that 600 million new jobs are needed by 2022 in order to prevent further unemployment. Many of these jobs will be precarious jobs, short-term, temporary, contract, or freelance positions with low pay and no job security. So the focus must be on creating effective regulatory approaches which can help to promote decent work. From underneath the crush of a neoliberal agenda which has imposed austerity measures, deregulated industries, privatized firms, and dehumanized workers, comes resilience in the form of calls for alternative interventionist approaches which focus on economic stimulus measures and more effective regulation of international labor standards instead of propping up existing financial institutions. In countries worldwide, protests and demonstrations rail against austerity measures in the Occupy movements and the Arab Spring movements. Latin American countries have pushed back against neoliberal policies by electing more leftist government officials. Economic growth in a capitalist economy based on consumption means more and more resources must be expended, so our planet's finite resources are in danger. Excessive use of these energy resources in return for short-term investments has a deleterious effect on the earth and results in long-term insecurity as a result of climate change. The shared distribution of economic power. Within the next couple of decades, it is likely we'll witness a shift in power from the global north to the global south. This shift won't occur without strong measures executed by the global north in the form of protectionist measures, such as multinational companies' expansion of existing facilities, more direct foreign direct investment, and perhaps increased tariffs on imports. The multinational companies of the global south at this point will probably function much like the global north multinational companies and impose a strict labor regime on its workers. Mergers of national major firms will continue worldwide in attempts to consolidate power and form monopolies. In the financialization of the world, there will continue to be increased disconnects between major power investors and stockholders whose only skin in the game is making short-term profits and discarding unprofitable organizational elements, which means job loss for workers. This means the future of work is likely to be characterized by instability and conflict. A different vision of globalization and work. Globalization in and of itself is not a negative force. We must separate the globalization process, which promotes improved communication, cultural exchanges, and challenges to gender and identity stereotyping, from the globalization practice, which has been hijacked by governments promoting neoliberal policies privileging free market capitalism. It doesn't have to be this way. Alternatives do exist, as evidenced in other countries who manage to balance the needs of capital and labor within a market society. For instance, the Scandinavian model, based on active citizenship, promotes free education for all from preschool to college, social safety nets for those who are unable to work or temporarily can't find work, and work-life balance friendly policies such as parental leave. They do this in order to promote a society in which all people have a decent standard of living and workers have respect and dignity in the workplace. Trade unionism is welcome and laws dealing with workers' rights are substantial. Another country which exhibits attempts to balance capital and labor is Australia. Under the new Fair Work program of 2009, attempts to harmonize relationships between capital, labor, and unions exist in social safety nets, work-life balance, minimum wage law, and a bargaining stream for low-wage workers not represented by a union. This doesn't mean that all problems of inequality and gender discrimination have evaporated in these countries, but it does suggest there are alternative avenues to the rigid neoliberal approach currently practiced by most countries. Our goals. Our goal is to create a world in which labor and capital peacefully coexist and one does nothing to the detriment of the other. This is a lofty goal and must emerge from the bottom up. This means grassroots activity in the form of collectives such as labor organizations, social movements, and groups which spring from ad hoc issues. In order to create a society in which all workers are valued and treated with dignity in the workplace, receive a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, and live in a social environment which provides a decent and safe standard of living, we must do the following. Implement global labor standards. Restore workers' rights legislation. Establish living wage standards. Promote legislation which provides equal pay for equal work. Enforce anti-discrimination laws. Provide appropriate social safety nets for those who are permanently or temporarily unable to work. Embrace the rights of representation through collectives such as trade unions, and provide free education, child care, and health care for all. By focusing on globalization from the bottom up, people can work together to produce a better world in which to live and work, a world which values humans over profits.